So now we're going to talk about effects on MIDI tracks. Again, there are certain things that are comparable to what we did with audio effects on audio tracks. We can actually add audio effects to MIDI tracks. But there's other things that are available to us as well. Parameters of our virtual instrument, our responder that's making sound out of the MIDI messages on the track. And also MIDI effects that are specific to receiving MIDI input in and transforming MIDI rather than transforming audio. So we're going to go through all of this in turn in this video. So let's start off with the virtual instrument itself. Pretty much any virtual instrument that you might add to a track is going to have some parameters that you can control. This is resynth that we've been using over the last couple of videos here. And it's one of the simplest virtual instruments you'll ever find, but it still has about a dozen different controls that change the timbre of the sound that it's creating. And so that we can obviously set those in different ways, the same way we would control parameters of an effect. So since it is showing up in our effects interface here. So if I'm playing this back, and I want to add kind of more square wavy sound to this, I can just turn that up like that. And of course I can automate these parameters the same way that I would automate any other slider that would show up in an audio effect. So that's one thing that's available to us. And again, this is a very simple interface. A lot of other virtual instruments may have hundreds and hundreds of different parameters that you can control on them. The other thing that we can do is we can add audio effects to MIDI tracks. The same kinds of audio effects that we were adding in Module 2, we can add to MIDI tracks. And what those are going to do is they're just going to process the audio that the virtual instrument has created. So whatever's coming out of resynth in this case is then going to become the input for our audio effect. So I'll go ahead and show you what I mean here. I'll go back to our effects chain, and I will add a JS effect, and I'm going to add an amp modeler here. So I'm just going to type in amp in this filter box so I can find a little bit easier. Guitar amp model. Double click that to add it, and here it is. And so we've changed the sound a little bit. If you hear it without versus if I add a little bit of that square wave, I'll get even more of a sense of the amp. So what we're doing here is we're doing something that you can't really do in the MIDI domain at all. We're changing the timbre of the sound. In this case, by simulating a particular guitar amp. In the case of the virtual instrument parameter, by changing the waveform of the sound that's being synthesized. These are things that you can't do in the MIDI domain at all because MIDI isn't actually making sound. MIDI is just describing how something might be made. So adding this amp model is something that's particularly well suited for the audio domain. It's something that's uniquely about the timbre of the sound. On the other hand, there are other types of things that we might want to do that are particularly unique to the MIDI domain, that are really changing the MIDI messages, the MIDI note data that's coming through in a way that would be really, really hard to do if we were just doing audio processing. So we have MIDI effects that help us do that. MIDI effects, again, instead of receiving audio, transforming it, and then sending audio out, they're receiving MIDI, they're transforming those MIDI messages and sending the transformed MIDI out. So one of the most common MIDI effects is an arpeggiator. So let's go ahead and add an arpeggiator to our effects chain here. So I will go ahead and just, I'm going to search for MIDI here in this long list, and we should be able to find the MIDI arpeggiator. Here it is, MIDI -- arp. I'll double click that, and I'm going to move this to the beginning of the chain for reasons that I'll explain in a second. What this arpeggiator has, the controls are not the most intuitive. But what it lets me do is set the rate of the arpeggiator in terms of beats, a multiple of the beats per minute. So if I want like 16th notes, I can make this into 4 here. And then, oh, I'm sorry. Then I'm going to hit the play. And I want it to actually change the pitch each time. If I want to change the pitch each time, I need to introduce a variant in the pitch. And so I'll introduce 1 to start. Have it go up, say, 2 semitones. And now you should be able to hear. creating all these extra notes in the MIDI data by operating at a rate that's faster than the beats per minute of my music and incrementing by 2 semitones. So that's a simple way that you can use the arpeggiator to create more notes in your stream by taking what's there and kind of adding to it and subdividing it and transposing it. Now, we need to talk about effects chains for a second and the order of things on the effects chain. Because it's important to understand this, or else you're actually going to end up with effects chains on tracks that give you no sound in the end, or effects that aren't working the way that you expect them to. The way this works, of course, is we have coming in from the track, we have our MIDI data. That's the information that's actually on the track. And then we have a series of MIDI effects, one or more, or I guess there could be no MIDI effects, but if we have any MIDI effects, that's where we need to put them in, because they're receiving MIDI in and they're sending MIDI out. And so that if we had a second MIDI effect, it would go there, and so on and so forth. The last MIDI effect in the chain is going to send the MIDI data to our virtual instrument, which is then going to turn that MIDI data into audio. And at that point, the audio is going to go into the first audio effect, which is going to transform it, and then from there, the second audio effect, and so on and so forth, until the final audio output comes out. And so it's very important that we respect this order of operations, that MIDI effects always come first, then virtual instruments, and then audio effects. If we come back to Reaper here, you'll see I was very deliberate about how I ordered things in the effects chain here. I had my MIDI effect first, then my virtual instrument, and then my audio effect. And if that order is not respected, the effects are not going to work as intended. One other note that I should make about the effects chains here is that this is all working because I have a virtual instrument that's part of my effects chain. If I had a physical sound module in my studio and I was sending MIDI out to that, I would not necessarily have the opportunity to control its control the sound coming out of that sound module, because it might be going straight into a mixer, physical mixer in my studio. I might choose to route the audio from that back into Reaper through some mixing operations and then be able to process it further. But that's not something that would come automatically. The simplicity of this, of being able to go from MIDI effect to virtual instrument to audio effect in this single chain without any special configuration, comes from the fact that all of this is virtual and all of this is really working just within my DAW. So that's a real power that we get from a DAW, that we don't have to think about these connections at all. We just really have to think about the order of operations. The final thing I want to talk about here is using envelopes and automation. This is fairly self-explanatory and works as you would expect, that just as we automated audio effect parameters in Module 2, we can automate virtual instrument parameters, and we can automate MIDI effect parameters as well. I want to show you just one small twist on that, or one extra capability that we get, which is that we can actually use external MIDI controllers and knobs that might be on them that are sending control change messages to help us record these automations. So let's go back to Reaper here and go ahead and close this up here. And what I want to do is automate a few parameters here. So there's a long list of things to automate, but I'm going to keep this fairly simple. With my arpeggiator, I'm going to automate the rate of the arpeggiator in beats per minute. With the resynth, my virtual instrument, I'm going to automate the amount of square wave that we have in the sound. And with the amp modeler, I'm going to just control how much it's actually there, the amount that it's wet versus dry sound that's coming through. So I can go ahead if I want, and I can draw these changes as much as I want. I can hold down the controller command key and click a point, and then I can click away from it, and then I can drag it however I want. So if I want my square waviness to go up over the course of this loop, I can do that. If I want the the amount of my amplitude modeling of my guitar amp modeling to change, I can change that if I want that to go. And I could I could draw these to be as complex as I wanted. and then I can look at the results. And so on and so forth. I'm going to turn off looping for a second because I want to show you how one other thing will work here. And so, let's say the square waviness was something that I wanted to control very subtly. Well, I could just hold down my command or control key and I could draw up and down like that, or do whatever I wanted to do with it. But I might want to do this live while the sound's actually playing back. I might want to do it in a way that's a little hard to do with the mouse. And we looked in Module 2 about how I could record automations. I can arm this track. So I come up here and I switch my mode to a right mode. And then let's say I just want to arm the square waviness here. So I'll turn off those other two, and I'm arming this. So I can play through this, and I can kind of drag those values around. But that's not so easy to do with a mouse and a slider. On the other hand, I've got this MIDI controller here that has all these knobs on it, sending MIDI control change messages. So if I click here on this button here, it says MIDI learn. Click on that, I can just move whatever knob I want to use. Let's say my mod wheel. And it's detected that message, and so it says MIDI channel 1, control change 1, modulation. And so what I can do now is I can drag my modulation wheel up and down. So I promise you I'm not touching my mouse here. I know you can't see that. But I can just move the modulation wheel on my keyboard up and down. And I can get a much more kind of subtle control. So when I play this back, I can use my mod wheel now. And get it just the way I want. And then I can turn off my, my automation. I can play it back. I'm sorry, to do that I actually have to switch my mode here on my envelopes from right mode back to read mode. And now it will play back just the way I want. So that gives you some more flexibility for how you're recording these automations. And it makes some sense, with one parameter that I want to kind of record live and get some more control over by doing it from a piece of hardware. It makes even more sense if you can imagine I have 8 or 10 or 20 parameters that I want to control. And I want to be able to control them all at the same time. That's really, really hard to do with a mouse while the music's playing back. But if I have 8 or 10 or 20 knobs on my MIDI controller, I can map each of those to a different automation parameter. And then I can record that stuff all together and get it just the way that I want. So to review, what we've covered in this video is MIDI effects chains in DAWs, how it goes from MIDI effects to virtual instrument to audio effects. We've looked at using MIDI effects and audio effects and the different reasons that each of them excel in different situations. And we've looked at automation envelopes for all of these things, and also about using MIDI control change messages to help us record automations. In the last video in this module, we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to look at other ways of working with MIDI in the DAW, particularly through pattern sequencing. And I think this is particularly important for people that might be looking at the videos thus far and saying, well, this MIDI stuff is great, but I can't really play a keyboard. I don't know much about music theory. How can I work with MIDI in a meaningful way? I think pattern sequencing offers a really compelling way to do that.